The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Whitting.
Welcome to NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Whitting. Our guest today, Jim Woodford, experienced a profoundly meaningful near-death experience when he died for nearly 11 hours. Jim was born in Newfoundland, Canada, and lost his father when he was 2 years old. He grew up in the home of his maternal grandparents, who sent him to Sunday Mass and Catholic school. Rather than religion, however, he developed a fascination with aircraft at an early age, as there was a seaplane dock at the edge of the river where the family lived. At age 19, Jim became one of the youngest licensed pilots in Canada, where he flew small aircraft to remote lakes in the provinces. As well as flying, Jim had a love of horses and actually met his wife Lorraine while they were both on horseback. Jim eventually flew larger aircraft and became a captain at a major airline, but his flying career was interrupted when he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré, a disease in which the immune system attacks the myelin sheath that covers the nerves. With the short circuit of his nerves, the paralysis and pain was severe, and although Jim taught himself to walk again, it was an overdose of painkillers that caused him finally to leave his body for 11 hours. Thus began his profound and detailed near-death experience in which Jim witnessed the doors to hell as well as heaven. He was helped by prayer and choosing correctly and met Jesus there. Today, Jim resides in New Brunswick with his wife Lorraine, where they own several horses. Now a devout Christian, Jim travels throughout North America, speaking of his experience in heaven and comforting the families of those who have lost loved ones, assuring them of the reality of heaven and the love of God. He tells his remarkable story in his book, Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, One Man's Experience with Heaven, Angels, and the Afterlife. Jim, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's wonderful that you can be here. Jim, I want to get your amazingly instructive NDE, but first, I'd like you to tell us about the prayer your wife prayed to God to bring you to a more Christian life.
Well, I guess it's a testament to be careful what you pray for. But I say this with remorse because I had somehow become a person who was obsessed with, shall we say, the ability to buy things and getting ahead in life and providing above average for my family. I thought that was a demonstration of my love. But somewhere in that arrogance, I lost my sense of self. And my nickname was Diamond Jim. Everything I touched turned to diamonds. More valuable than gold, I guess. And Lorraine, who, bless her heart, had always such a strong love of God. Frankly, I don't know how I ever convinced her to marry me, but I did. And as dedicated as she was to God, I was just as much in the other direction. And so over the years, and especially when I went through the illness, I became very bitter because I'd lived a life of, as I said, supposed success, but I felt empty. And unknown to me, Lorraine was saying a prayer to God. And the prayer was, God, you have to break him to remake him. And boy, did God ever take her up on that.
Wow, he sure did. You were still fighting the terribly painful effects of Guillain-Barré when you drove your truck out to some land you planned to sell. In your book, you quote a beautiful line, "When we come to the end of ourselves, we come to the beginning of God." I really love that phrase. Tell us what happened when you parked the truck.
Well, I'd like to begin first by telling our listeners that, look, as a senior airline captain, I never touched a narcotic. I never drank, the odd glass of wine maybe. I loved my career. To me, anyone that needed that needed an emotional crutch. If I needed to get high, I got in my own airplane and went up to 30,000 feet. But I was spiritually lost, I guess. And I think like so many of my generation, sad to say, we focus on this self-sufficiency and you need no help from anything divine or otherwise, and how wrong I was. So that late that afternoon when I got in my truck and I didn't feel well, I was on an experimental drug that actually we went through the Canadian health system and got permission to import it from England. And because there was no known, well, there are no cures that I'm aware of for people with Guillain-Barré. So I was on this experimental drug under a doctor's care. And in fact, it did help quite a bit. But I soon realized that if I took more of it, I had more relief faster. And I guess that's the slippery slope to addiction. My wife's a nurse, but because I still traveled quite a bit, I was able to get advanced prescriptions to support my pain control. And so with my arrogance, I thought, well, if I take a few more, well, you know what happens there. As I said, it's a slippery slope. So that day I had already taken more than the prescribed daily dose, but I felt so ill and so full of pain to go out and place markers on this significant piece of ground that I was trying to sell. And as I parked the truck, I didn't plan it this way, Lee. I was facing the setting sun. And I sat there in the truck trying to gather up the strength to make my way around this field and place the markers for the surveyors to use. And as I'm sitting there trying to, I guess, steel myself against the pain of walking, I moved my gloves, and there, hidden in the compartment of my truck, which my wife never drove, was some of the medication that I had been using. And so I rationalized that, well, a couple of more won't hurt, knowing full well I was well beyond the daily dosage. Well, so I had a bottle of pop there, and I took some more, and I sat back waiting for that wonderful warm feeling that would erase the pain in every joint of my body and allow me to function. But suddenly I became aware of, instead of that warm, soothing feeling, it was as though my feet had caught on fire. And I actually looked down at the floor of the truck, and it was a new Dodge Ram, to see what was the cause of this heat. And it spread rapidly up my legs and into my body and into my chest. And suddenly my heart began to beat faster and faster. And I kept raising my head. It was as though there was water filling the cab, and I had to raise my head to breathe, to straighten out my chest. And you just know when you've done something catastrophically wrong. And suddenly I became aware that this is no longer just pain. This is catastrophic. And it was at that moment, from somewhere deep inside of me that I didn't even know existed, this prayer welled up out of me. I'd never prayed since I was a child. And some people say, well, that was just fair. Whatever it was sincere, and it was heartfelt. And I cried out, and I remember looking through the windshield of the truck as I gasped for air, and I raised my right hand to the setting sun, and it was shaking violently. And I cried out the first of 6 words that we will discuss that I believe allow me to be here with you today, Lee. The 3 words that I cried out in that truck as I staggered to get these words out, I cried out, God, forgive me. Because I had this sudden awareness that I had never thanked the Creator. I'd never sought to thank God for the life that I had lived. And now, as it was being stripped from me, I cried out, forgive me. Forgive me for not just recognizing Him in my life, but for all the goodness that I could have done and did not do. Forgive me. Some people say to me, well, it's a little trite at that moment. Listen, when you're facing death, just as the old saying that there are no atheists in foxholes, there are no atheists that are dying in trucks.
And was that when you thought you were getting out of your truck?
Well, I couldn't breathe. And so suddenly I fell forward. The last thing I was conscious of was banging my head on the steering wheel violently, and I was gone. I'm not sure how long at that time that I was out, but I remember sitting back up and my head hurt terribly from banging it on the steering wheel. I looked through the windshield and I knew time had passed, Lee, because the setting sun was now right on the horizon. And as I sat back in the truck, I suddenly became aware that for the first time in 4 years, I had no pain. None. I finally got it right. You have to take more than they want you to take. I slid out of the truck. I walk about 15 to 20 feet away. I mean, it's a beautiful spring evening in April. I can smell the grass. I can see the setting sun. I hear the birds in the trees. But I feel wonderful. I felt like I used to feel when I was a kid. It was as though, Lee, I had taken off a heavy, wet overcoat. That's the best way I could describe it. I felt so light and alive. Boy, the medication really worked. And then I'm trying to rationalize, how can I feel this good? And I turned toward my truck. And instantly I'm filled with rage and anger because some son of a gun is sitting in my truck. Not only that, he's slumped over the steering wheel. How dare someone sleep in my truck? And so I turned to go over there and give him a good what for. Have you ever had a dream where you're trying to run, something's pursuing you, and you can't get your feet to move? That's the sensation I had. I felt great, but I looked down and I could just shuffle in inches forward. But I did manage to get a little closer to the truck, and I look up at the truck to see if this guy is still there. And I am absolutely stunned beyond comprehension because I'm struck with the realization, Lee, that the guy slumped over the wheel of that truck is me. It's my body. I know it's me because my face is turned toward me. My eyes are staring ahead with no life in them. And there's blood running from my mouth. I speak of the arrogance that I had. I could fix anything. I could survive anything, no matter if there was an engine out when I was flying in the bush or an issue my friends had, I could always help them. And I immediately began to, old habits die hard, Lee. And I began to formulate, if I could just get back in that truck and get back in my body, everything will be okay. I can do this. And I started to move toward the truck by inches in a panic when suddenly I began to rise. Now, as a pilot, I'm a good judge of altitude. And within seconds, I'm 100 feet above the truck. I can look down and I can see my toolbox in the back of the truck, look through the rear window, see my body slumped over the wheel, and I'm rising. I look out over the beautiful sunset of that field, and then my body suddenly canted backwards at about 45 degrees, and I look up, and there I saw it, Lee. Like a golden circle, like a gold wedding ring, about 60 feet in diameter. And then suddenly the center of it filled with a deeper gold. And then it swung inward to the right as though on hinges. And when that happened, my body oriented toward that light, that tunnel of light. And it was as though I had hit the thrusters on one of the large airliners that I flew, because the sense of speed and tremendous speed, I went directly into that golden tunnel. The strangest thing was, unlike advancing the throttles on the jet, there was no sound. And although I felt as though I was moving at incredible speed, Mach 1 at least, there was no sound. There was no sense of the wind rushing by. It was just silence. But within that tunnel, it was definitely a tunnel. The inside was filled with what looked like golden cloud forming this circle, and I was in the center of it. And I'll never forget this. I was trying to describe how fast I was going at a church in Baltimore one night. And there was a young guy sitting in the front pew, and he said, "It sounds like warp speed to me." Because, he was right, because I was trying to describe, Lee, how the stars streamed by me. Mm. They were streaming by me, just streaks. And that's a perfect analogy that young man had. It was warp speed or Godspeed.
So you saw stars
streaming by me. It was as though I was.
Wow.
It was as though. How do I describe something that felt like forever but happened in an instant? There are no words to describe that. But I was conscious of tremendous speed and silence. But very quickly, I could see that the tunnel was narrowing. And at the end of this tunnel, there was a bright light, even brighter than the interior of that tunnel. And then I began to decelerate, and I came upright, and I find myself facing, I still don't know whether to call it a door, a portal, an entrance. It was covered in mist. But I knew I had no choice but to step through that mist, because I sensed over my shoulder the tunnel was closing behind me. And so, as you would stepping into a room and you have no idea what's inside of it because of the mist, I cautiously put my right foot inside, and it went down about 4 inches, and I felt something solid. So I then brought my other leg through. The mist covered me. The portal closed silently, and I looked down at my feet, and I cannot believe what I'm seeing, because I'm standing on the most incredibly beautiful green grass I have ever seen. Not only that, as I gently move my feet, light ripples through every blade of the grass. And then the mist began to clear. And I look up, and I'm again stunned beyond belief, because to my right, there is this magnificent vista of rolling fields and pastures, and flowers in colors that don't exist on Earth. And I mean, I'd never read anything about NDEs. I mean, I've heard the term, but I had never bothered to investigate it. And here I am looking at this incredible vista. There's a beautiful light in the sky, but it's not sunlight. It's just a fused light that bathes everything. But then, curiously enough, as I moved my vision from the right to the left, that incredible, beautiful, mesmerizing vista, the grass, as I moved my vision to the left, it went from green to dark to charred to burnt. And as I traversed my vision more directly to the left, that side of what I was looking at was dark, and the skies were black. And I realized, how can this be? This is the same. This can't be a weather system this close together. So I was so taken by it, scared by it. And yet I've always been a technical person. I needed to understand how this could be. Most pilots are technical. I needed to know what this is. So I took a few steps, and now I could walk normally to the left, and I walk over, and there's a chasm or an abyss. And I look down, and what I see, Lee, is the walls of this chasm are shiny, like black coal, like anthracite. But at the very bottom of this, I can see a dim red light, like a flickering campfire you would see in a distant forest. And I'm stunned, because this is so different. And do I have time to talk about what I saw?
Oh, absolutely. This is so theologically significant and so unusual for an NDE. This is a very important part of your story.
Well, thank you. So, again, a combination of terror and inquisitiveness and wanting to know. As I looked down, the fire became brighter, and it refracted, not reflected, but refracted off the walls. So it was as though the walls themselves were filled with fire. And looking down, the fire became brighter. And then I realized I'm looking straight down, but at about a 25-degree angle to the left. And I realized that this light that I see is coming from an entrance at the bottom of this hole, as you would look in a cave. Mm. And as I'm watching, I saw the fire grow brighter, and then, to my absolute amazement, this abomination would be the correct word, this strange creature, and it was large, emerged from this side entrance. Mm. And I could hear the creaking of massive iron doors that had not been opened for a long time. And this creature was coming through them. And to describe it, imagine something about 60 feet tall with a body that seemed to be encased in fire. It was enormous. It was like a large, overweight creature with a body built of fire. And the head on it was hunched down between its shoulders, and it seemed to be looking for something around the bottom of this pit. And I guess people say, why didn't you run? Listen, I was transfixed. I had never in my wildest dreams ever thought I'd have to look at something so horrendous. Hollywood could never duplicate what I saw. And as I'm looking down, transfixed by this creature, suddenly it turned as though it sensed I was looking at it. And it turned its squat neck on its hunched back and looked up toward me. Lee, the look of absolute hatred it had in its eyes for me, for all mankind, was unmistakable. And it seemed to be focused. It was as though it had been waiting. And then, to my dismay, it reached up with one claw-like hand and grabbed the side. And I was amazed at, despite its size, at its agility. It moved very quickly. Now, keep in mind, this is a body that's on fire, and it's huge. And as it came up toward me, I remember hearing something. I heard screaming. And Lee, here's the scary thing. It wasn't the creature that was screaming. The screams were coming from its body, but it was as though it had consumed souls, and those souls were screaming out for help. And now it was coming for me. Mm. And as I said, it moved with such agility and speed for its size. It reared up out of the pit, and I fell backwards and scrambled backwards on my elbows and my back because it stood over me. I will never forget what this thing looked like. But you know what I remember most? The sound of the saliva dropping from its jaws and splashing on the ground. Now, I know this sounds like a cheap horror movie, but this is what I saw. Mm-hmm. This is what I saw.
Was there a smell along with the sound that you heard?
Thank you for reminding me of that. I'm trying to stay within the time confines. But yes, as it was coming up out of the pit, there was a stench, an odor of death and decay, a smell that you would associate with a grave. And you know what it was? It was the smell of despair. The smell of despair. And all of that combined just terrified me.
I think in your book you also said there were whispers out of the darkness calling your name, calling you personally. Yikes.
Yeah. And when it was about 2/3 of the way up, I began to hear my name being called. My name, Lee. This creature knew me. I mean, I may not have been a great man, but I wasn't a bad man. What did I do to deserve this? And this creature was calling to me. And it was, Jim, we are here for you. come to us. And over, and it had this strange enchantment to it. It was trying to draw me toward it. And I really believe to this day that had I stared into its eyes for 10 more seconds, I would have been snatched. But as I said, I'd fallen on my back and I was scrambling to get away from it. And then I just got up and turned my back to it, and I could feel its breath on me, its breath that was a stench. I could hear the saliva, and I just hunched my shoulders together, trying not to acknowledge its presence. And then, remember at the beginning of this, I said there are 6 words. The first 3 I cried out of my truck: God, forgive me. And now me who had never prayed, I lifted my hands to the beautiful fields to my right, and I cried out, God, help me, help me, help me. And, I think that's the primary message of this event, is that it is never too late to cry out to God, no matter what the life you've lived. If you call out with a truly contrite heart, yes, I was scared, but also I was so sad that I had not lived a life devoted to God. And that prayer had no sooner left my lips than I look up in that beautiful sky, and 3 points of light appeared, like distant stars in that brilliant sky, stars during the daytime. And they came from different points, one at about 270, another one from about 90 degrees, another one maybe 45 degrees, and they were all converging to a central point. And all the while I'm concentrating on that to keep my sanity, because this thing is calling my name and it's standing right behind me, and I can feel the heat of its breath. And those 3 points of light, Lee, they merged into one brilliant light. And suddenly I realized they're angels. They're angels. God had heard my prayer. Look, I might not have gone to church, but we've all received a Christmas card at some time in our lives with an angel on it. I knew what I was looking at. And they were coming toward me at such speed. And my pilot instincts took over. They made a beautiful landing and came toward me. And they're these incredible beings of light that I thought was just a crazy old legend. They exist. They are, and the first one that came toward me was about 10 feet tall, and the second one was about 12 to 13, and coming behind was a warrior angel. And how I knew that was he was dressed differently. He was dressed for battle. He had armament, and he was dressed for battle. And he was about 15 feet tall, and clearly there was a commanding presence. But as they came toward me, they created a light, and that light went beyond me, Lee, and struck that creature. I turned in time to watch it screech in agony when the light hit it, and it scrambled backwards down that hole like a rat running for cover. Darkness and evil cannot exist in the light of God. And I witnessed it. And I turned to see these beautiful creatures advancing to me. 3 of God's angels. And the first one, who I later found out was actually who had been assigned to me at my conception, was my guardian angel. And this beautiful, tall, slim, neither male nor female, but the beauty of both. The gentleness and love of a female, but the resolute ability of a warrior. Fine-featured, silver hair, not silver in the sense of aged, but brilliant silver hair that at first I thought was blonde, but then I came to realize that what we mistake for a halo is actually the golden light of the angel's wings refracting and reflecting off their silver hair. But the most incredible aspect of these creatures of God were their eyes, Lee. Not blue, not green, but the most incredible shade of violet. All guardians have violet eyes. Now imagine the size of this beautiful creature and the eyes that match it. And I was mesmerized by the beauty and the sense of love. And this first angel came, and I didn't see them walk. They kind of glided toward me and came up to me, and I stared up into this magnificent face. And I say he, but they were neither male nor female. And the guardian smiled at me. And then he put his arm around my shoulder. And I felt such love and concern. And he looked into my eyes with those beautiful violet eyes. And I heard his voice. And it wasn't, the lips didn't move, but it was as though he had entered into me and I had entered into him. And I heard this beautiful voice say to me, "Fear not, James, for we are your constant friends." Constant friends. And then this magnificent wing unfolded from his body and went around his arm and around me and pulled me into his body. And the feeling of love was overwhelming, and peace, having just escaped the creature that was after me. And now here I am being held with an angel, by an angel. And here's a kind of a funny footnote. When the angel hugged me, I smelled tapioca. Now, Lee, I'm not trying to found the Church of the Holy Tapioca. I'm not. But this speaks to the magnificence of God's love for us. Because when I was a young boy, beating my way through a snowstorm in Newfoundland, home to my grandmother's house, and as we say, summer there is on a Wednesday, 2 to 4. And I'd come into the house. My grandmother would have a big warm bowl of tapioca ready for me. So you see what happens? God knows our every wish. And he knew that when I was a little child, how much that meant to me. And for someone else, it may be the scent of your mother's perfume, the smell of your father's tobacco or his aftershave, but it will give you this feeling that you have come home. And that's what I had. I had finally come home.
NDEs are so often personalized like that. You know, people say, how can all of these be so different? But each one is designed for the person experiencing it, to speak to them and to their needs.
It is, Lee. There are similarities, the tunnel and so on. But I think that God treats each of us as individuals. We tend to think of ourselves as part of a massive group of creatures. But to God, each one of us is precious.
Yeah.
And he knew me. He knew me unlike anyone had ever known me before. He created me. He created you. And you're absolutely right. I think that he personalizes each experience. So we see the similarities of the other dimension, but it's tailored to our lives. And imagine the shock to our systems when we see all of this, because having that scent of tapioca immediately calmed me, and I knew I was I was in the center of love.
Now, in your book, you say these angels bowed to you, and you were stunned by that.
Yes, and I have to just say with one more thing, if I may.
Of course.
While the angel was hugging me, I felt so safe and loved, and he started to move away from me, and I reached over with my hand, and I put it on the angel's arm, and I felt it was like putting your finger in an electrical socket, but it felt good. This wonderful feeling went through me, and it was just a wonderful feeling of intensity. And I remember it to this day. When I put my hand on the arm of the angel, and I felt, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that. So I went to take my hand away. And when I did, Lee, the most amazing thing happened. The light of the angel's body clung to my hand till I got it about 10 inches, 6 to 10 inches away. And then it let go and went back into the angel's arms. And that's why I have a chapter in the book that talks about the sticky love of God.
Yes. Which I thought was a great image.
Yeah, I have many pastors that tell me that they've never heard that term before. Anyway, so getting to your question about the angels bowing to me, they were so polite, and it wasn't a stilted politeness. It was more of a Victorian style of politeness, So they each bowed to me in turn as the angel opened his arm and his wing. And they bowed deeply to me. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of my presence. And I found out later from my guardian that I questioned, why did all of you bow to me? Because I felt it should have been the reverse. I should have been bowing to them. And his answer stunned me, Lee. He said, James, do you not know that when we look at humanity, we see the light of our master in each of you?
Wow.
So it's hard to imagine that this divine being that can cross eons of oceans of dimensions, and yet they bow to us, they honor us. And I feel it should be just the reverse of that.
And then you were walking with them, I guess.
Yes, and the second angel, who had a tablet and was not an iPad, but some sort of scroll that he wrote on, he pulled his arm back, and then I heard his voice, and he said, James, would you walk with us? And so I turned, and this beautiful path appeared through this vista of flowers, and we began our walk through paradise. And it was wonderful. Let me just speak for a moment to the communication. I discovered something immediately. My vision had become 360. Without turning my head, I could see everything in front of me, beside me, and behind me. And it may sound confusing. It wasn't. It was as though I had always seen this way. But the effect is overwhelming. And it's like a 360-degree IMAX theater. And as we walked, I asked questions. I've always been inquisitive. And as I said earlier in the broadcast, I always had this desire to learn. And I think that's what made me a good pilot, was I was interested in how things worked. And so I was free to ask them numerous questions, too many to go into here, but I talk about some of them in the book and in the book to come. And it was just astounding to hear their answers. And I became so comfortable with them. I said to the first guardian that had identified himself as my guardian, I said, may I ask your name? And he said something really different. He kind of looked away in a shy way. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. He said, no, I take no offense, but we are shy about sharing our names. And I said, why would you be shy with your name? And he said, James, as you know, when our Master Jesus walked the earth, when he cast out a demon, he always asked the demon's name. Knowing someone's name gives you power. But I shall tell you my name. And he did. And it was one of the most precious things that happened to me.
Was this your guardian angel that gave?
This was my guardian angel, yes.
So that's a powerful gift to give you, because you can call on him now easily.
And that's what it is, Lee. It's a gift. And, I know that this is the age of YouTube and People make fantastic claims. The difference with mine is I've seen my own death certificate. I've talked to the doctors who said you had no brain sign. You weren't dreaming this.
Mm.
You weren't imagining this. It would show up. You were deceased. We told your wife there was no point. We would keep you on the machines until your children arrived to say goodbye. But to us, you had already gone. I don't say that to indicate that some other person hasn't, that may not have the proof that I have, that we shouldn't believe them. But sadly, there are people that aren't telling the truth. I don't do this for anything other than trying to help people deal with the loss of a loved one or the loss of what's coming. What people have to realize is all of you within the sound of my voice and Lee's are dying of a terminal illness. It's called mortality.
As you're walking along, to bring you back to heaven, you describe it as features like Earth's features, but I guess incredibly enhanced, mountains and streams and trees and flora. And you mentioned also that the flowers are translucent and describe them like stained glass. Tell us a little about that.
Well, as we walked along, I was asking questions and looking at this incredible countryside. I mean, I've been in 52 countries as a pilot, but this was different. And the flowers, many of similar to what we have here, but so many different flowers that I'd never seen before. And I've spent a lot of time in Africa and in South America and, in the South Pacific, but nothing to compare with this. And as we were walking along, I became aware that there were colors that I could not describe and still can't describe because we don't have them in the palette of colors that we have on Earth. They are different. But I was transfixed by one particular group of flowers, and I asked if we could stop. And I knelt down to look at them because I realized that these incredibly beautiful flowers were translucent. And so each petal was different than the petal underneath. And so they all combined to create a color that doesn't exist on Earth. And while I'm down there, Lee, I become aware of the most amazing fragrance. And I just kept wanting to immerse myself in this fragrance. And I turned and looked, and by this time, my guardian had knelt beside me on one knee, and he was smiling because he could see how transfixed I was. And I said, "They smell so wonderful." And he said something in return I will never forget. He said, "Yes, James, that is the scent of sanctity. For these flowers are God's discarded thoughts."
Ooh, nice.
Think about that.
Wow.
Think about that.
And then in your book, you mention contrails in the sky.
Yes, we were having this, I guess, leisurely stroll through paradise, and they were showing me the brooks, all of which seemed to be filled with, the water flowed like liquid crystal, similar to a fast-moving stream we'd see here, but so much more. And the pebbles in the bottom of the brook were gold color, and so it gave this incredible light coming up from this. And as we walk along, they point out so many beautiful things and magnificent birds and the sound of the rushing water. And the other amazing thing was, as I was smelling the flowers, I began to hear something coming from the flowers. And I realized it sounded like a little tinkling noise, but Lee, it had a melody to it. And I turned to my guardian and I said, "Is that music I hear?" And he said, "Yes, James. The flowers are so happy you're in heaven. They're singing to you." And so the sound of the brook, the sound of the gentle breeze, the birds flitting in the trees and singing, and it all combined to create a melody. And if I looked carefully enough with my enhanced vision, that sound rose in kind of a pink haze, not an obtrusive haze, but a pink haze, and it floated off toward a distant light on the horizon, which they explained to me was the throne room of God. So all the sounds of heaven combine into a hymn of praise.
And didn't they describe the contrails as prayers specifically for you?
Yes. So we walk along and we come to this split rail fence, much as you'd see on any horse farm in America or Canada.
Yes, this is so important.
And we walk up to the fence, and again, just as God knew that I had a love of tapioca, he knew my love of horses. And the tall angel said, James, look, and he stretched his hand out and the sleeve fell back, and he made a motioning with his hand, and suddenly from the far end of the pasture, coming at a trot toward us, were three of the most magnificent horses I had ever seen. I mean, they were the epitome of their kind. And look, I had never read the Bible. I didn't know that it said that when Jesus returns on the final day, he will be riding a white horse. And coming toward me was this magnificent white horse and a dun horse and a palomino. And they were magnificent. I'll always remember, Lee, that as their hooves traveled over the ground in the trot, the light that I had detected beneath my feet, their hooves created the same effect of light on the grass as they trotted toward us. And they came right up to the fence and leaned over the fence and looked at me. And I couldn't help it. I reached through and to stroke the chest of the white horse. And my hand went right into its body. It was a being of light. And just as had happened with the guardian angel, when I withdrew my hand, the light, the sticky love of God clung to my hand. And I stood there looking into the incredible eyes of these magnificent creatures. Beauty without vanity, nobility, everything good.
Yeah.
Standing in front of me. And so I'm amazed. And then I look up into the sky. And this is a sky with no sun in it. As a pilot, I looked for some way to orient myself. So I was trying to find the sun. Am I southwest? Am I northeast? There is no sun. Everything is lit by the light of God. There's no sun, there's no moon, no stars. But what I do see in that beautiful, translucent, heavenly sky were these six columns of silver going up in the sky, and like contrails, and that you see behind a jet on Earth. And I turned to my guardian and I said, are those contrails? Now, in my mind, I knew that I don't think there's an airline that flies to heaven. And if there is, I want the job. But I'm looking and I'm stunned because there are six contrails arcing right above me in the horse pasture. And I said to the guardian, what are those? And he said something that was, again, beyond my imagination. He said, James, those are the prayers of your family for your soul. And I found out much later when I had come back and we were comparing what I had seen and what my wife had called her sisters and one of their sons. And they gathered in our kitchen, arms around each other, formed a prayer circle, 6 of them. And they prayed that if it be the will of Jesus, that he send Jim back. And so what I was witnessing were the prayers from my family for me.
Jim, in the few minutes we have left, I wonder if you could spend a couple minutes describing the city of heaven and then, of course, your encounter with Jesus.
Yes, I turned from the horses and they gently guided me. And then again, one of them said, James, look, and he made a motion with his hand. And instead of the flowers, I was looking at this large, like a reflecting pool, but it wasn't water. He made another movement and it seemed to rise. And then he said, touch my cloak. And I did. And I held on to the end. And suddenly it was as though I was transported above and I'm looking down. And then it opened up completely. And I realized I'm looking down on nothing less than the holy city, God's home. And Lee, I mean, dimensions are different there than they are here. And it was immense in its scope delightful in its beauty and magnificent in its orderly look. And I'm looking down on heaven. Now, there's something that needs to be explained here. People say to me, "Didn't you see your family that you loved?" No, I did not. You see, I didn't know I wasn't staying. I didn't know I was going to be refused. And once you go through the gates of heaven, you never come back. And that's what I'm hoping for the next time. But what they did do was hold me above the city and allow me to look at it, much as you would a see-through, a flyby video. And it was very familiar to me because I'm used to looking at the ground from altitude. And so with my hand firmly, by this time, held by the guardian, I'm able to look down on the holy city and at the same time be able to ask questions and get immediate answers of what I was looking at. So I was able to see not only the beauty of heaven from all angles, but the halls of knowledge, the halls of learning, the hall of records, even the hall of healing. And I questioned why in heaven, where we are completely restored, would you need a hall of healing? And he explained to me that is because many of mankind die in tragic, immediate circumstances, and they need a period of grace, is what he called, in this beautiful place where it's explained to them what happened to them and why they are there. Otherwise, it would be too much to handle. And to look down on these vistas of gardens and so on. And I was able to see, Lee, these beings of light. They were clearly had a form. They had hands and they had feet. They moved, but they each seemed to be cloaked in light. And yet the more you looked at them, the more visual they became in sense of their features and so on. And I turned to the guardian and I said, "Am I seeing this correctly?" Because I said, with just a few exceptions, everyone I'm looking at seems to be in their early 30s, the peak of life on earth. And he said, "Yes, James. God so loved the sacrifice of his son that he declared that no one in heaven, with the exception of the elders, no one in heaven would be any older than Jesus was when he was crucified." And I mean, that is, I know it doesn't say that in the Bible. I didn't know any better. I never read the Bible. But I know I've been reminded thousands of times. It doesn't. I know. I'm just telling you what I saw.
Others who've had near-death experiences say they see their grandparents as they looked in the prime of life in their 30s.
Yes.
So that's confirmation.
And the wonderful thing was I could look at a group of people, 6 or 7, and you could tell that they were welcoming someone who had just come into heaven, a family member. And they were walking with their arms around each other, showing, just as you'd take someone to your capital and show them, the Lincoln Monument,
yes,
or the White House, or, and it was just, they were sightseeing. And it was so evident. Because with my vision, I could focus right in on their faces, and I could see the wonder and the glories that's being sent back. Here's a question that I must take the time to answer. So many people say, "I just don't understand that if my wife or my husband, and we loved each other so dearly, and one of us passes before the other, how can they be happy in heaven when I'm still here on earth? I don't understand. How can that be?" Here's how it works. Time exists there, Lee, but it's different. So for the loved one that has gone ahead and is there, to them, it's like 15 to 20 minutes, and their loved one is going to be with them. It's like waiting for someone that's coming to dinner.
Yes.
We on earth are still stuck in this time zone, and we're facing 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years without our loved one, and it is difficult. But that's where the necessity of faith and belief,
yes,
belief in God, comes in.
In your book, you mention a nursery for the aborted or miscarried babies.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, there was one magnificent building, and the colors of that building were pink and blue, and that sounds rather garish, kind of Las Vegas-y, with apologies to Las Vegas. but it was the most gentle of hues. And I said, "What is that beautiful building?" And the guardian said, "James, that is the nursery." And I said, "Nursery in heaven?" "Yes, James. This is where children who die at birth or of complications during birth, this is where they come to, and they are cared for and loved by angels and by others like you who have come to be with them." And I was just so overwhelmed by the love of God that babies. So this is such a blessing. I remember speaking in Baltimore one night. This lady started to cry because she had lost her baby girl just 2 weeks before, and she was desperate to know where she might be. And these children are raised in this nursery, and they eventually become part of the populace of heaven. They don't remain babies. They grow, but they grow at the rate of 3 times we do on earth. Now, they're not growing a physical body. I'm talking about growing a spiritual body.
Yes.
And so when a child is 3 here, there's 6 in heaven. When there's 6 here, there are 9 in heaven. So they mature fairly rapidly. And many of them go on to work in the nursery themselves, to volunteer in the nursery. So, yeah, a nursery. And that is such a comfort to people that have lost a child, even if it's not in birth or in an accident. It is the refuge for innocence.
And speaking of innocence, you said as well that there are dogs and cats and other animals all over the place.
And on this massive lawn in front of the nursery were thousands of these little beings of light, but clearly children, playing with dogs and cats and all sorts of creatures. And it was wonderful to behold. They had a hard time making me move on.
Well, we do have to move on here, but tell us about your encounter with Jesus.
Of course, because it's the most important part of this journey. I was back down in paradise and was looking again at these magnificent flowers. And I realized that I had not seen my guardian. And I turned to look, and to my right, about 60 feet away, the ground rose in a slight rise, but, a small mound or hill. And I look, and my guardian is there, and there's another figure that I had not seen before. And my guardian is bowed low, even lower than when they bowed to me. And facing them is this magnificent figure with a golden light that was more majestic, more beautiful than even the light of the angels. And it was as though a golden light behaved like water. It flowed out of the center and flowed down all sides of this magnificent creature. I could not see the face. You know how you drive down the road on a hot summer day and there's a wavy line of heat coming off the asphalt? The face was covered with that, and I couldn't see. But I was transfixed by the sheer magnificence of this creature. And I realized as I looked that my guardian had taken this from his sleeve, this small, slim book, no bigger than a cheap roadside diner menu, and he had opened it for this figure to see. The figure was bent over, looking at it, and as I'm watching, this golden river of light flowed down from that figure, down that slope, and pooled around my feet. And suddenly, Lee, I was filled with this profound knowledge that what I was looking at was none other than Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I mean, someone that I thought was some dusty old legend. And the very moment of revelation of who this was, the shimmer on his face vanished. And although he was reading the book, he turned gently toward me and smiled at me. And this figure, this magnificent face, this of gentleness and strength and love and compassion, smiled at me. And I had to get closer. And then he turned back and started to read again. And I was also filled with the knowledge that the angel was showing Jesus the book of my life. And I immediately was ashamedly, that I had been given so much and had done so little to help mankind. With all the resources I had, I could have done so much. And I was ashamed. And I tried to crawl. I fell to my knees and I tried to crawl through that golden light to get closer. And I was crying. And my desperate plea for forgiveness for my stupidity, for my ignorance, for my arrogance. And then the images floated off the book of my life. And suddenly my mind was filled with all these scenes of my life, my childhood, my mother, all the things that had happened to me. And how do you describe a lifetime happening in the flash? Or as they say, my life flashed before my eyes. And I'm being shown this. But Lee, not only was I shown all the love that I was given, I was shown all the people that I had hurt. Now, no one tells you this, but I do. I saw the people whom I had hurt, whether unintentional or unintentional. And worse than that, I felt their pain. And I was filled with remorse, and I began to cry even harder. How could I have hurt so many people when I thought I was a good person? And I was just overwhelmed as all these images came toward me and entered my mind. But I continued to crawl forward. Then I stopped, and the guardian gently closed the book and put it back in the sleeve. Jesus straightened up, and then he turned directly toward me, and I saw him in all his radiance. The Son of God. The Son of God. And through my tears and my remorse, I felt the most incredible love for me and for mankind. And I did nothing to deserve it. That's the saddest part. I did nothing to deserve this love. And I wanted to get closer, to just be as close as I could. And suddenly 2 angels lifted me up and held me back. And I'm not big, but I'm persistent. And I actually wrenched my shoulder free and started to dropped to my knees and crawled toward him again. And this time, Jesus, his smile was different. And he raised his right hand. And when he did, Lee, the sleeve of his cloak fell back. And there in the wrist of his arm were the remains of the crucifixion. This dark reddish stain on his wrist. And that made me feel even worse. But I still continued. But he held his hand up as I tried to move forward on my knees. And this time it was an unmistakable command of stop. His hand was raised, and there was no mistaking. And it was at this point that this all culminates. And then I heard his voice, the voice of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He knew me, Lee. He knew me. And what he said to me wasn't a lot, but it meant everything to me. And then I heard but the difference was with the angels, their lips, there was no motion of speaking. But with Jesus, it was as if you and I were having a conversation. And he looked at me with those incredible eyes of gray and green and blue. And with his hand still in the upright position, This is what he said. James, my son, this is not yet your time. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters of the wonders we have shown you. And then his hand descended and closed, his right hand, and closed over the left. And then the full impact of what he had said struck me, that I was not being allowed to stay, that I had to go back. And I began to plead, I began to beg, I began to cry, please, please don't send me back, please. This is what I have searched for all my life. Please don't make me go, please. And then I said, which I can hardly believe, I said, please, Jesus, let me stay. I won't be any trouble. Can you imagine saying that to the Son of God? It seemed to make him smile even more. And suddenly, two angels appeared, and they picked me up bodily and turned me around and started to walk rather briskly down the path with me. And I kept crying, please let me stay. And I wrenched my head around to plead one more time and look back. And when I did, Jesus was gone. But standing in the exact place where Jesus had stood was the most magnificent warrior angel, massive in size. And all of a sudden, he began to unfurl his wings. Imagine a creature 15 to 20 feet tall with a wingspan of 24 feet, 12 on each side. And then the wings grew in size, and he glowed like the sun. And clearly what he was telling me was the way forward for me was not open at this time. And suddenly I'm in a dark tunnel. It's not a tunnel of light. It's wet and it's cold. And I shouldn't say this, so I'll apologize. Lee, I felt as though I was flushed. There was a sound of running water. And I know that's an ignominious end to a wonderful experience, but I guess it was at that point that I came out at the other end, screaming at the top of my lungs around. I was intubated, wires and hoses coming out of me everywhere because I'd had complete renal failure. And my wife tells me that the nurse came running in, and she was in the quiet room with her sisters, planning funeral arrangements and waiting for our children to arrive. And they said, Mrs. Woodford, come quick, come quick. And she ran in from the quiet room to the gurney I was on. And she said, your eyes were extended. Your eyes were like saucers. And you're trying to talk to me, and you can't speak because you can only gurgle because of the tube. And eventually they got the tube out. And she climbed up beside me on the gurney, and I looked into her pretty face, and she said, you're alive, you're alive. And of all the things, Lee, I could have said to my beautiful wife, I said to her, Lorraine, I saw Jesus, and Jesus has horses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to say thank you for this. This is such an amazing story. And I have to tell our audience that your book, which is a lovely book, and I would encourage them all to get it, of about 200 pages, was edited down from about 600 pages in your original writing, and that you're working on a second volume. And I hope to have you back when that's completed so that we can talk about this again.
Well, thank you, Lee. And the real blessing for me is it enables us to help ministries with the proceeds from this book where and when we can, and to help the poor, to help orphanages.
Yes.
Because I never wanted to be seen as one of these people that is relating this because I wanted to make money from a book. That was never the intention, and they had to talk long and hard to convince me to do this. But it's been such a blessing, especially to those who are in hospice, both for the families who are watching a loved one pass and listen, since the beginning of time, man has feared the darkness and what lies beyond. Mm-hmm. And I, for some reason known only to God, was privileged to see it.
Well, you've been very blessed, and the pain that was inflicted to bring you back to sanity, I guess you'd have to thank your wife for her prayer.
There's a side miracle to all this, Lee. I died in pain. I have the markers of Guillain-Barré in my blood work, and I have no symptoms. None.
Another miracle.
Truly.
Thank you so much, Jim, for sharing your incredible experiences during your 11-hour near-death experience. And if listeners would like to hear this show again or any of our more than 400 archived NDE interviews, please go to TalkZone's NDE radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Whitting, where you can listen and comment on the complete NDE radio library. And for something completely different, be sure to like, follow, and share our new NDE Radio Facebook page, and discover our Facebook group and links to our YouTube channel while you're there. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Whitting on your Facebook app with your desktop or mobile device. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, at Talk Zone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Whitting, saying thanks for listening.